There were so many red flags that I didn't even see, but I didn't even know to be looking for them. And the relationship I had with my high school boyfriend was a very abusive relationship. And I fell into this relationship because of the childhood trauma that I experienced and the beliefs that I had about myself. But what I didn't know is that leaving that relationship after 5.5 years, some of those same things would start showing up in my relationship with my husband, even when we were starting to date. So let me dive into it. So, with the high school boyfriend, I was an absolute people pleaser for him. I did everything he wanted and then some, because if I even resisted slightly, it would amount into this big, huge fight. It would be this knockdown, drag out fight. And then the physical abuse didn't start right away. We dated for about 3 years before the physical abuse started. And that was also when his drug addiction really started to spiral out of control. But up until that point, if I did not do what he wanted to do or I did not agree with him, then it would be mental and emotional abuse from him. And so I found out too, not long into our relationship, that he had cheated on me multiple times. And I stayed with him though, because I felt like I wasn't loved by my parents. So I was loved by him, even though he was doing things that hurt me. And I felt like I had been abandoned on some level by my parents, because my parents divorced when I was young. And my mom had a child with my stepdad. So I felt like sometimes my mom's whole world was my brother. And I also had three older stepbrothers when in my mom's household. So there were five of us kids, and not that I ever lacked for anything. I will say that I was spoiled rotten. But I had this story going in my head about the fact that my youngest brother, my mom's son with my stepdad, was like the favorite because he was the baby. And I was an only child at my dad's house until I was 13. But I felt like I had been replaced by my stepmom. So I felt like I was always kind of in this state of purgatory. Like I really didn't fit in at my mom's. I didn't really fit in at my dad's. My dad and my stepmom would do things when I was at my mom's house for the weekend, and he would get her roses and flowers, and I would come home and there would be nothing there. So I had started crafting this story in my head that my dad loved my stepmom more than me. And so when this guy came along in high school, I finally felt like I was the center of someone's world. I had convinced myself that he loved me more than my family, which was really not true. It was more of that he was infatuated with me, and I had mistaken that for love. But when you're 15, you don't really know what love is anyhow. So I go into this relationship feeling like on some level I had been abandoned by my family, and here he was, this knight in shining armor, coming in to sweep me off my feet, spoiling me with roses. Instead of buying his lunch, he would buy me flowers from the flower shop in high school. He would walk me to every class. He would buy me jewelry and things like that from money that he had earned helping his dad at the auto shop where his dad worked. And so I just was really like love struck. And we were polar opposites too, which I was the goody goody two shoe, and he was the reckless one who did not follow rules at school and ended up getting expelled after our junior year. So there was like a little bit of vicarious living through him too, because my dad was very, very strict, and his parents were the polar opposite of that. So it was like a little bit thrilling too. And I kind of had this feeling like, wow, he chose me when he could have picked anyone else. And so that was sort of the dynamic that started the relationship. And so, as much as I was infatuated with him, he was equally infatuated with me. But it was more that he didn't want anyone else to take me from him. So he became super controlling. And that was where the people pleaser tendencies in me really started to happen, because I could see that when I didn't do what he wanted, it did not work out in my best interest. It did not work in my favor. And so I already felt like I had been abandoned by my parents. I didn't want to be abandoned by him too. And he would threaten to leave me all the time. And that was, my worst nightmare, because I didn't want to be alone. And so uh it was, very tumultuous. We would one minute be fighting like cats and dogs, and then the next minute would be sunshines and rainbows, and everything would be okay. And so I also really didn't have like the ability to use my voice because he often judged me and criticized me. And so I often really just, if there was an argument that took place, I very quickly waved the white flag and I gave him, and I just let him win because I didn't want to hear the venomous things that he would say to me about how ugly I was or how disgusting my body was or how no one would ever want me. And he was a fool for even wanting me too. And so I really just sort of put this armor on, and I really became guarded, and I really didn't let my thoughts or my opinions or my beliefs or my feelings even matter. I just stuffed them down so far, and I stuffed and I stuffed and I stuffed and I stuffed and I stuffed, mostly because I wanted to avoid the conflict. I wanted to avoid his judgment. I didn't want that in that vulnerability because I was already super insecure. I had really low self-esteem, and I felt special that he picked me. And so I also really wanted to avoid the conflict because when we did fight, inevitably it would lead to me having a black eye or my hair pulled or, being punched or spit at or, being kicked out of his house, like him taking my keys and making me walk, like all kinds of crazy abusive stuff. So I really did whatever I could to keep the seas calm. I didn't want to rock the boat at all, because it was really quite scary for the boat to be rocked. And so what I realized was that I was settling for this unhealthy relationship because it was better than being alone. It was better than um, feeling unloved or unworthy. It was better than fearing no one else wanting me. And it was better than fearing of having another relationship like him, because that was bad enough. I didn't want to sign up for something else like that. But then there was also this sick thought running through my head that if I leave him, he'll kill himself because he tells me all the time he can't live without me. And so that really forced me to stay much, 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 much longer than I wanted to. So within 6 months of a relationship, I didn't want to be with him anymore. I wanted to be done, but I was afraid to leave. And so it took me 5.5 years for that relationship to end. And I thought leaving that relationship, that would be the end of those relationship problems, and I wouldn't be dealing with things like that anymore. Little did I know that my now husband and I, when we started dating at 22, I was bringing these issues into our relationship. So he hadn't really experienced dysfunction. His parents didn't fight in front of him and his brothers. If there was something that they didn't agree upon, they would talk about it when he and his brothers were not around. So he didn't know how to argue and fight. He hadn't been in a long-term relationship like I had. He had dated, but nothing longer than a couple months. And the girl that he dated before me, she cheated on him and then told him that she cheated on him. And he said, if you do that again, then it's over. She did it again and fessed up to it. And so he broke up with her. And so he didn't really have any baggage that he was bringing to our relationship at all because he hadn't really experienced any trauma. Now here I am. I have enough trauma for one of those luggage racks at the airport to hold all of the baggage and drag that sucker through the airport. Well, that's what I came to our relationship with, that much baggage, that much drama. And so I started the relationship very, I'll say, open, and I, was not really at his beck and call, but I was. And I really had to talk myself off the ledge if he didn't want to get together with me because he wanted to hang out with his friends. So I had these abandonment issues and these trust issues from my childhood and from this 5.5 year relationship with my high school boyfriend, that I started creating these stories in my head that if Pete didn't want to hang out with me, that meant that he was cheating on me and he didn't want to be with me and he just didn't know how to tell me and he was going to break up with me. And so I would get really clingy and upset and very confrontational about the fact that he didn't want to be spending time with me. And I didn't get to the point where I searched his phone, but I really, really, really wanted to, because I was like, I know there's something that he's hiding there. Because when the high school boyfriend and I were dating, this was in the time of pagers. So that shows you how old I am. He had other girls paging him with their code to call him, so my pager code was 546 because that's KIM. But then there were other girls, like one girl that he cheated on me with for several years. Her pager code was 333 because her favorite number was 3. So there were times that I would go through high school boyfriend's pager and I would see all of these pages from these other girls and I would ask him about it and he would make up some stupid story and I would believe him every single time, even though in my gut, I knew that he was lying. So I came into this relationship with Pete with trust issues because I had been burned before. And so I was so worried about him leaving me that I would be clingy. I would act very insecure. I would almost be like a little bit of a loose cannon. It wouldn't take much for me to get upset and cry and become really angry. And the poor guy was blindsided. He did not even know what to do or how to handle it. So he would start, overcompensating, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. What did I do? Can you tell me what I did wrong? Please don't be mad at me. I won't do it again. And so that's really not healthy. But it got to the point in our relationship, and we were married at this point. We had been married for probably 7 years. I don't even know. I'm just making up a number, but we had been married. But I had gotten to a point where I started avoiding intimacy in our marriage because I was going through therapy, which was an absolute train wreck. I'll do another video about that another time. And so all of this childhood trauma had been dredged up in therapy. And I started to feel badly about the fact that I was basically sexually abused by the high school boyfriend because he would force me to do things sexually that I did not want to do. And when I would say no to him, I don't want to do that, he would become really angry and really aggressive and force me to do it anyway. And so you could kind of say that there was rape. It was more forced things rather than rape. But it was just, it got to this point where then I started to feel like here I am married with 2 kids in therapy, and I started to feel very uncomfortable about myself sexually and about sex and intimacy in general, that I didn't want it. I didn't want to do it because I was like, I had this story again in my head that he was just using me because it was all about him and it wasn't about me, which is not true. Our relationship has never really been one-sided. It's always been a mutual relationship, which is why we've been together for as long as we have. But I just had this crazy story going in my head. So here I am, not trusting him, so scared that he's going to abandon me, avoiding intimacy. And this is into our marriage, that these trust issues and these abandonment worries were still haunting me and still following me along, even though it had been nothing, like there were no reasons in our relationship for me to not trust him. He had never done anything to show that he was going to abandon me or our kids. He's, a very loving and caring person. So there was no reason for me to feel like he was mistreating me sexually. It was just all of these mental things that I had replaying in my head over and over and over and over and over. And I'll say there was a point in time, like when we first started dating and the time that we got married, like there was a period of time where all of this kind of settled down and I didn't really have these thoughts or these worries. But then when I went to therapy and I started doing the work again, it all came popping back up and being dredged back up. And that's where it was really rearing its head again, until I had to do another round of work on all of this. But I was also at the point with him where I would avoid conflict, but I would also overfight. So I didn't want to fight with him, especially in front of the kids, because I didn't want our daughters to grow up with dysfunction in our household, because I grew up seeing that and I didn't want that for them. And I also had this thought, like, if they see us fighting, then they're going to think that we don't love each other. And I also didn't want that. I didn't want them to think that when you fight with someone, it means that they don't love you, even though now I understand that disagreeing in front of them is actually healthy because it shows them how to do conflict resolution and to know that you can disagree with someone and still be loved. But I also, when we did fight, it was just like this complete unleashing on him, where I was like literally going for the jugular and was going to take him down if it was the last thing I did, like not literally going for the jugular, but metaphorically with my words. And he was not at all equipped to handle that. And so he would become frustrated and not understand and want to walk away. And then that would infuriate me even more. So really, I was the toxic one in our relationship for a very long time without even realizing it. And what I was doing was I was repeating this cycle because I had been so used to that relationship cycle with in an intimate relationship, because that was what I experienced for like my first real relationship of 5.5 years in high school. But I also had a boyfriend before the abusive boyfriend. We started dating when I was 15 and he was 17 and he had a criminal record. You can tell I hadn't really made the best choices with boyfriends. And this is because I was settling for unhealthy relationships rather than being alone. I just felt like I had to have a boyfriend in order to be loved or to be worthy and to be seen. And so first boyfriend was bad news, and he was mentally and emotionally abusive. And so I left him thinking that boyfriend number two was going to be the knight in shining armor to sweep me off my feet, but he was a million times worse because the relationship was longer. And then here comes my husband. So I unintentionally was trying to recreate those unhealthy relationships in my relationship with him because that was really all I knew. I didn't really know any better. And I had that expectation. And I had seen some dysfunction growing up in my household, in my mom and my stepdad's relationship, that it was almost normal for me. And so I didn't know how to navigate a relationship without the dysfunction. And it wasn't until I started doing the work with a life coach that I understood why I was doing all of these things. And it was because this is what I had learned. This is what felt safe. And this is how I felt like I meant something, like I mattered. And it really kind of validated me that someone would want to be with me. And so what I had to do was I had to actually let my guard down with my husband and actually start being vulnerable with him and knowing that our relationship was secure and I didn't need to have any trust issues. I didn't need to be a people pleaser. It was okay to be intimate with him because it wasn't in an unhealthy way. And I wasn't being used for someone else's needs and pleasure. And I didn't have to continue this cycle. I could actually break it. So this was many ways where unhealed childhood trauma was impacting my adult relationships, and it impacted my teaching career too. It's impacted friendships. And so I can share those stories another time, but there are having all this unhealed trauma in my life, it really did impact my adult relationships until I actually did the work to heal it. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.